Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Welcome, everybody, to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I am, again, so excited about this episode. We're going to be talking about betrayal that shows up in marriage relationships, betrayal that shows up in friendships, betrayal that shows up in organizations and within leadership. It's so important that we have a grasp of what betrayal is about, how that it impacts trust. It creates a shock to our system. Often what you will see is preoccupations and so many different things that move to even PTSD and the way that life now is metabolized. And so we have with us again, Rick and Christine Presley. These guys are licensed marriage and family therapists. I love doing life with these guys. They are two of my very favorite people. And they happen to be experts in the field of betrauma. That's kind of putting them together. Yes. Betrayal, trauma, and helping relationships after a betrayal begin to heal. Both are certified sexual addiction therapists. They also, Christine has been certified in a small group of experts around the partner betrayal recovery. We're going to take the principles and first deal with sexual addiction and the betrayal in that context, but then we're going to cross-pollinate these principles to betrayal across the spectrum of any environment for which somebody would be betrayed. So let's begin by simply asking the question, what is betrayal, and even what are the issues that emotionally surface whenever somebody is betrayed? So would one of you like to lead that off?
Yeah, I'll start out. So in the work that we do, we oftentimes see clients who are coming to us after a discovery of some inappropriate, problematic sexual behavior has been discovered. And so, this has likely gone on for a long time. Many times it's gone on for years and years and years. Undiscovered, undiscussed, all this. And so the partner, and for us, because we do so much work with men who've been doing that and the women partners, we'll kind of refer to it in that way. It is definitely not unique to men being the betrayers and women being the betrayed. It definitely goes the other way. We do this work, and these wives find out this information or discover this stuff through some way. They discover something on the computer. They get notified by somebody their husband were acting out with. Message, Facebook message, whatever. Somehow the discovery happens, and in that moment, there's this thing that happens with this new information that this wife gets, that my life, as I thought it was, is not reality. Mm-hmm. And that right there is the reason why we call it betrayal trauma. Because that moment is so unique in a marriage life that looks very, very different than just about any other painful thing that a marriage could go through. That moment of discovery and all the things that follow that, all the questions and all the information that comes out after that is so unique and so life-changing and life-altering. That's why we call it betrayal trauma, because it's a moment of trauma.
Just describing it the way you are is so harsh. I mean, it's such an emotional roller coaster because it attacks you at your very sense of self as a result of the undercurrents of what is real, what is reality for me, and now do I even trust myself to be able to connect with reality? And so many things that I took for granted, so many things that I thought I knew, I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And of course, the brain is trying to reorganize around survival first, and then the sense of belonging. So Christine, you are so involved with the partner who has been betrayed, what are some of the emotional and psychological issues that you notice beginning in them when they come and they are dysregulated, they are, probably angry, and instead of me filling in those blanks, I'd love to hear what you experience with your clients.
Sure. I believe that in 2006, they first did a study. It was the very first time a study came out where what they have found is that the symptoms that are actually happening in a partner when they have discovered betrayal, whether it's through infidelity, compulsive sexual behavior, or pornography, they really mirror PTSD symptoms, so post-traumatic stress disorder. So the criteria of that, we can go through that.
Hit those, yeah.
Criteria A is actually a potential threat. So in order to actually be diagnosed with PTSD, there has to be a potential threat to life. So whether it be marital rape, which is harsh and happens about 20% of the time.
20%
Yes.
of the time. I didn't even know that stat.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a pretty high statistic, and yet if it isn't that, there are other things, like even the threat of an STD is considered a potential harm. So the second criteria is to relive the symptoms, relive the thoughts, intrusive thinking. So they have nightmares, they have terrible dreams. And so that keeps them from sleeping, that keeps them alert all the time. They can't go even half of the day without having intrusive symptoms. They also, anytime they see their partner, they have thoughts of, what is he doing? How is he responding? What is he thinking? And it's all this constant ruminating of thought when it comes to what has he done and am I safe? The third criteria is avoidance of people, places, and things. And so they no longer want to go where they can be stimulated in a way where there is a thought of, oh, who knows? Who doesn't know? Am I safe? I can't go to church anymore because nobody knows, and if they knew, they would think bad of me, or they don't want to go to the mall because especially in the summertime when they're scantily clothed, and they don't go to the beach, or they just have a complete avoidance of people, places, and things. And when that happens, what they are recognizing is that their whole world environment becomes isolation, and they get shut in a sense, which then ultimately changes their personality.
Wow.
When their personality starts to change, it's because nothing is safe. Their whole life is now a threat. That causes depression. So the fourth criteria is negative moods and negative cognitions. So we have this negative thoughts about self, like it's my fault, or I'm not enough, which then the cycle of that combined with the avoidance of people, places, and things really increases depression. It increases this feeling of something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
This has got to be my fault. And so we get this hyper awareness of and always on alert with anxiety and depression and stress. And so what some of the research shows that if you do not address the negative cognitions, it's my fault, I'm not good enough, you will not heal. So that's one of the pieces that is so critical to the healing aspect. The fifth criteria is hyper awareness, like emotional arousal and reactivity is actually what it's called. So there's hypervigilance. Like you're constantly aware of your surroundings.
Makes sense.
Always looking for the next threat, or the shoe's gonna fall, or monitoring everything that the husband is doing. When they go to work, what are they looking at? Are they in the place that they said they're gonna be? So criteria 5 is emotional arousal and reactivity. And what that really means is basically you can break it down to 4 categories. 1, they don't sleep. They don't sleep. They might get 2 to 3 hours of sleep because their mind is constantly on alert. It's aroused in a sense of, I'm not safe. I mean, the essence of us is like, when we talk about the brain, like the baseline question is, am I safe? And if I'm not, we're always aware and on the alert for what's the threat? What's the threat that's available or that's coming against us? The second one is anger. So some clients really get stuck in this fight mode, and really just want to, like, they don't know how to calm that, and so they just continue cycling in this, I'm going to fight this, I'm going to fight this, I'm going to fight this, because they can't calm themselves and they never get to that sense of peace. Hypervigilance is an enhanced state of sensory sensitivity. So an enhanced state of sensory sensitivity. So we're all hypervigilant in one way or another. We have to be. That's just the way we live. This is a hypervigilance where we are constantly on alert and aware of everything and anything that could come against us. Whether it be when our husbands go to work, are they at the places that they're saying that they're at? Are they offering truth? Are they just a constant awareness? And that piece of this emotional reactivity or emotional arousal and reactivity is one of the most common. And the last one of the emotional reactivity, arousal and reactivity, is the suicidal thoughts. And this one is very alarming because it's not that they want to die. They don't have a desire to die, but statistics prove that 60% of partners, when they find out that there's betrayal, at least on an occasional basis, feel like, I just want it all to end. They don't know how to handle the feelings. They don't know how to handle the intense, constant, aroused emotions, the anxiety, the depression. And so they want it all to stop, and they don't know how to do that. So so it's a pretty significant traumatic experience when
Absolutely.
they either find out, whether it's through confession or they discover it. It's pretty significant.
Hey everybody, I want to slide right in here and thank you for joining us for today's episode. Let me ask you for a huge favor. If this podcast is providing value to you, would you consider subscribing to it wherever you get your podcasts? Also, if you feel that it would be valuable to somebody else, please like it, comment on it, and share it on your social media feeds like YouTube, Facebook, or wherever you populate networking. And one more big favor. If you like the show, please go review it. And if it's true for you, give us 5 stars. And when you review it and rate it, it gives our efforts greater opportunity to grow, and that would mean the world to us. Now let's go back to this week's episode.
Well, when I hear that, I think about some of the people I have interacted with from other churches. One time in the last few years, was in California in a group, and the group had a business leader who happened to be a lady, and she had experienced from her hometown the betrayal of her husband. Her husband had an affair and maybe multiple affairs. So she ends up looking for support. You know, she's in that whole spin of emotions, anxiety, all of the things you're describing there are coming at her. She's in hypervigilance, and she goes to her pastor, for which her and her husband had been there for years. And now the whole dynamic, as you described, of going back into that environment, now all of our relationships were shared. I don't even know what to do to make sense of this. So the safe place to land for her was her pastor. So she actually opens up to her pastor the issues that are at hand, and his response And so this is so important to me that our audience hear it.
Yeah.
His response was, were you having regular sexual experiences with him? Were you making yourself available to him? Mm-hmm. And of course, when you describe this profile of a person who is experiencing PTSD, and then you as a loved, nurturing figure highlight the idea of you're at fault, you should have, were you, when in fact the affair that he had fundamentally has nothing to do with her. So it just ripped her apart, created further confusion, and galvanized the trauma that was already happening. Do you guys experience that in the work you're doing with clients, that pastors sometimes get that thing where it's not only not a hospital for them, it's actually kegs of dynamite that are being exploded?
Yes.
So talk about that just for a minute and help our audience understand.
Yeah, we hear that far too often, and it's so sad because what is unintentionally, I think, being done is just this blaming of the spouse that somehow she had something to do with controlling her husband's behavior. Which I think goes to a larger story of like, do we ever have any control of anybody's behavior? And should we have control of anybody's behavior? And I believe the answer is always no.
Right.
So if a wife is controlling a husband or a husband is controlling a wife by doing anything or trying to do something or not do something so that they will or won't do something, it's codependency.
Yes.
You know?
And God doesn't even do it.
Right.
God
Exactly.
will not even control human free will.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, I give pastors, I have some grace for pastors because the narrative that we followed for years and years and years, both in the church and in psychological circles, was we did use this codependent narrative because it works on some level when you're thinking about things like drugs or alcohol addiction, when you're thinking about gambling addiction, because those things are really hard to hide. And so a spouse typically has some level of knowledge that problematic behavior is happening in their spouse's life. And you'll see, husband or wife, if the other is, let's say, an alcoholic, you'll see them do things like complain, protest, get mad, throw a fit. Why are you drinking so much? Why do you go to the bar every time before you come home? How come you just can't love me? You know, all this kind of stuff to get them to stop drinking so much. They may control the budget so that they don't have the money to buy. They may go and buy a type of vodka or that type of alcohol that the partner doesn't really like, and so they won't drink it as fast or as much. You know, all these things to try in some way control the behavior. Yep. And so those are some codependent, if we want to use that word, kind of behaviors. Well, that works in that arena. And
it doesn't always work in that arena.
It doesn't always work.
It's not effective.
No, it doesn't. It's not effective at all, actually.
Yeah.
But we can make sense of why a partner would do that.
That's clarifying. Good.
We can make sense through that codependent lens to say, well, they're trying to find some safety. They're trying to find some stability. They're trying to find some intimacy in their relationship. And if I can just get him or her to stop drinking so much, maybe I'll get those things.
Yeah.
Well, what the research in 2006 and since then, and the shift towards this betrayal trauma, is so much more helpful to these partners in this area of hidden, I would say any hidden behavior, but oftentimes it is around hidden sexual behavior.
Yeah.
It makes sense of their reaction to it. And it gives us, I think it's such a much more compassionate approach that says to this partner, you didn't know anything about it. Mm-hmm. How dare me or anyone else blame you when you had no information about it? You had no clue it was happening.
Yeah.
It's totally secret. And when that secret is revealed, boom, that's when these symptoms that Christine just went through begin to show up. So, I have understanding for pastors, who might have learned in their own training, in their own family, in their own church, through other psychological circles, to look at the family system, to look at all the components, to look at the wife's contribution and all of that, because in so many other topics in a marriage, that makes sense. But on this one, it doesn't make sense. It's very, very ineffective and incredibly damaging to that lady who's just experienced her entire life just vanish, like the reality. That's I'm going to come back to that word. The reality of what she thought was reality wasn't true.
Yeah.
And when she finds that out, everything just gets turned upside down.
Let me jump in again and tell you about two amazing opportunities for pastors, spouses, and senior leaders of ministry that will increase your leadership, and they're both free. I'm talking about monthly Zooms and also weekly process groups. First, we hold a monthly Zoom event that is 1+ hours with Dr. Todd Bowman, a psychologist and human behavior expert, and me. We usually have around 15 to 30 other participating pastors, spouses, and leaders. The monthlies have been amazing to help pastors collaborate around tactics, personnel challenges, and even how to navigate our own inner world. The skills you'll learn and a newfound pastoral community will expand your leadership mapping with everybody you lead. These monthly Zooms happen every month on the second Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time. And then the second opportunity for pastors and spouses is our weekly process group that spans for 6 weeks. In our weekly process group, we provide tools that guide you into your story and help you rediscover you, redefine leadership, redeem life, and redream ministry. Weekly process groups give time to open your stories as you collect the dots, connect the dots, and correct the dots. Attunement begins with you making sense of your story. When you live with mindful attunement to your story, you'll find that the people you lead will begin to also make leadership sense to you in profound new ways. Our alumni tell us that this is one of the most impactful experiences they have ever had. We place ladies in groups of 6 to 10, and also we put men in groups of 6 to 10. The value of the weekly experience is $900+ per person. However, in this season, we're offering it to you for free. You can see some of our alumni sharing stories on our events web pages. You can find out everything you need to know to get involved in either the monthlies or the weekly process groups by going to redinkrevival.com. I hope to see you there soon.
It's the loss of not only the intimate connection with your spouse, it's the loss of dreams. Yeah. It's the loss of survival, of how's this economically going to impact us? Yeah. What's the relationship we'll have now with the kids? What's going to be the future that we would have together? And will we have a future together? And all of that grief is something that is so powerful. And we protest grief internally. We don't want to feel the grief. So then there's this escape. What do we do? And so a lot of times it moves towards getting stuck, moving into depression, and so on. And I do want to say, Rick, I appreciate so much you giving pastors a little bit of margin in understanding that. I don't know. I tend to be a little more strict around that. Because
I think I am too.
Yes,
having received the words of how have you contributed to this problem?
Well, I will never say that to a client.
Right.
I'm saying that here in the podcast because we're talking to pastors, but I would never say that to a spouse client.
Right.
And say, well, let's understand your pastor. I'd be like, your pastor's an idiot.
Yes. Oh, I know that. I know that you would say that. And I also know that in this context that you're trying to give an olive branch just to connect with pastors. But I want to go to your side of that story. And the lady that we were in group with, and she told it, I mean, I think it's fair to say the emotional experiencing that we all had in the group was that, and I don't want to sterilize it, so I want to be authentic. We were pissed off. And there were 3 of us who were senior pastors, and we were like, that is abusive behavior.
Yeah.
So talk about, and I want the audience to know, in case they've never been a part of Red Ink Revival before, that Rick, you had a years-long, plurality of years-long sexual addiction. And then when the disclosure or when you began to find out about these things, it threw you in. So you're not just a therapist helping somebody from a technical level.
Sure.
You actually are somebody that's experienced it. So talk about what the experience was with the spiritual leaders, because you were on staff as a pastor in churches.
Yeah.
And so you clearly are not, you're getting it from a senior pastor, you're getting it maybe from denominational hierarchy. Talk about that.
Yeah, it was damaging, because we go and we try to have trust with our spiritual leaders, and you walk in and you're like, I use the metaphor that it's like you've been burnt all over your body, and you walk in looking for help and healing, and the person on the other side of the table says to you, why did you put gasoline all over your body and light the match? Like, why did you hand him the match to do that? It's like, it just doesn't make any sense.
That's amazing.
And again, well-meaning, not only pastors, but therapists do this every day because they're out of their scope of influence.
Yeah.
They don't have the
Expertise.
education.
Yeah.
They don't have the knowledge of what it is. And so they actually create this more wanting to avoid and isolate because nobody is safe.
Absolutely.
Well, let's. I don't want to run past that. So, a lot of times, therapists, which you all already know, the high honor and regard, esteem I have for therapists, psychologists as a whole. Also, as I was working through my own anxiety and panic issues, which I wasn't even sure, I didn't even know that was what was happening in me, but it was. And I bounced from therapist to therapist, probably went to around 4. I got some help, but not a lot of help. And what I have learned in the certification process around sexual addiction therapeutic work, I learned about me. I mean, it was therapeutic in my experiencing, and I figured out what was going on in me. And so I do have a passion around that, and I will call out therapists in general, I don't name them, but general, who will put on their website or other places that they specialize in things, and then you dig into what their certifications are, and they don't specialize in it. I've seen people who have actually said that they specialize with trauma, and then and I've had one-on-one conversations, and they had maybe an hour in their master's program around it. And I think today there's a lot more in master's programs, but many didn't get any, and they say they specialize. They do that as well around sexual addiction. They do that around partner betrayal. So what would be a certification that somebody would look for to help them know, now this person knows what they're doing. I'm not going to get further damaged by them. What would that be?
I would do the certification of sexual addiction. What is it called?
CSAT.
CSAT. Oh my
Certified
goodness.
Sexual Addiction Therapist.
Thank you. I have it, and I don't even know what it's called, so that's okay. But it's through ITAP, so the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals.
Yes.
And then also there is an APSATS.
What's the initials?
APSATS.
APSAT.
So APSATS. And so they also do certifications for partners as well.
Okay.
But now ITAP also does the certification of partner trauma.
And what's the initials on that?
Which one?
The partner betrayal.
It's CPTT.
CPTT. Yeah.
So Certified Partner Trauma therapist.
So if somebody is interested, they would want to call and interview a therapist. And by the interview, which are free, the interview, the 15 minutes or so, you would ask the questions of what are your certifications around either sexual addiction or betrayal trauma. And if they don't have a certification, that needs to be a flag of sorts, and they may be great. So I do want to be clear. They could be therapists who are great in other areas. This just is not their area of expertise.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. I mean, even before I had a certification, I was seeing clients like this. But I also understand, and probably shouldn't say this, but I understand what betrayal trauma is based on my own experience.
You bet.
And yet I've done a lot of reading and on how to treat, and now the certification to follow it up with. It's very important because to have a certification in this, or to go to somebody in that, because of the actual damage that you can do without it. They could spend a year and never get to the heartbeat of it. Just thinking, oh, we'll just deal with it. We'll just EMDR it away. Which is fine. Those are important. Those are important. We'll work on the anxiety. We'll work on this piece. But if we never work on the actual betrayal trauma and what's caused it and how we, and all the symptoms that come along with it, and we don't know how to identify those, we're going to miss it. We're going to miss it, and we're going to extend it even longer. And that also, you can get stuck in it. More than if you were to just go to the right places and the right type of therapist, and they can really help you.
Well, talk about the stuck. What's that mean to you when you say they can get stuck in it?
Stuck in anger cycles, stuck in sadness and depression.
And how long could that go?
Years.
Like
years.
Like 2 or 3 years, or like 10 years, like the rest of their life?
Yeah, the rest of their life. If it's not addressed properly, they could get stuck in it for the rest of their life. Which, what do we know about being stuck in a chronic state of anxiety that causes so many bodily issues? Chronic inflammation, immune disorders, cancers,
gut issues,
digestive issues. People have had parts of their colons removed. I mean, and these are some of my own clients that have had these things because they have been just stuck in ruminating thoughts and just chronic levels of anxiety.
The power of betrayal. God created us to connect, to belong. And when the enemy can create a betrayal, it's one of the most vulnerable parts of our humanity, of the image of God that gets marred in us. I do think that it's so important for us to honor what betrayal actually does to our humanity, what it does in our personality. You said it even shifts your personality. People actually change because of trying to make sense of the betrayal. I even think of somebody that I know, and I've known them for many, many years. Their spouse had multiple affairs. This person actually did show features of today what would be diagnosable as borderline personality, which simply is symptomatic that they can't hold the middle. They live in the extremes, and they love, in this case, high arousal. So boredom for them, the anxiety of not feeling something begins to move them towards, I've got to make something sound over the top amazing or over the top horrible, and I can't again metabolize living in the middle. And it's interesting because they had some of those features prior to the affair, but the PTSD, the trauma of the affair, it just threw gas on the features. And then the rest of this person's life, they have struggled with every relationship that they've ever wanted to interact with. And it now multiplied to the degree that this person, if anybody who's just a peer challenges or says, what you just said may not be true because there's exaggeration, massive exaggeration in conversation and drama. And if somebody just simply says to them, yeah, I don't think that's accurate, to this person, it feels like full out attack and betrayal. And so they live in the other extreme and literally
How would you like to reboot your personal finances this year? How would you like to take control of your money, turning small wins into big results? I want to encourage you to check out my wife Tina's financial coaching business at tinanorris.org. You might be wondering, what is a financial coach? A coach is someone who will personally team up with you to outline financial goals, inspire you with energy, help you stay focused on your goals, and so much more. You can do it all through Zoom, and she provides a free initial consultation, so there's no pain or cost to you for your first steps. Maybe you've been to several Financial Peace University cycles, left with great intentions, but struggled to execute. You need a trainer, a coach, another human that won't shame or judge you to help you stay on track. Tina is a certified expert that will help you with clarifying financial dreams, understanding spending patterns, reviewing all financial obligations, assessing financial and insurance needs, defining a spending plan, understanding your emotional profile related to money, building margin for savings and emergency funds, learning strategies for attacking debt, and referring recommended financial advisors to multiply your tomorrow. And she isn't selling any products, policies, or investments. She is the ultimate financial teammate. As Tina's husband of 30 years, I can tell you firsthand how much of a difference Tina's skills and giftings have made. Our financial portfolio wouldn't be a fraction of what it is today if it wasn't for her. She works with clients that are single parents, everyday people, pastors and church staff, as well as high-income professionals. I've known executives of Fortune 500 companies that manage billion-dollar budgets at work, but then come home to complete financial disorder and disappointments. Shame roars at them as they face the stresses of marriage, kids, and struggling retirement plans. A personal trainer can change the way you think, emote, and behave. If you have friends, church members, clients, or even young marrieds that are launching their financial lives, you will do them all a favor to have them check out this amazing option. If professional athletes need a coach to win the day to fulfill their dreams, then you and I do too. And you won't find anybody better to help you get there than Tina Norris. Set up your free consultation from anywhere in the world today. Go to tinanorris.org to find out all the details.
And I think about how many people get, as you called it, stuck in the betrayal. And that's a pretty extreme scenario, I guess. Is that extreme, or is that more common than what I even know?
I think there's two things. I think borderline personality disorder, it can be diagnosed separate from betrayal trauma.
Yeah,
so
sure.
If that is an actual diagnosis and then betrayal trauma on top of that, that can enhance it even more.
Multiply.
Because the response of borderline personality disorder is this: I need people in my life, but I don't want you in my life. Because you're a threat. And so betrayal trauma will exacerbate that to an enormous amount. So if they do not get a handle on the diagnosis, and now then the trauma on top of that, we just have a double-edged sword here. We have to really address both of them. One of the other thoughts that I had was a lot of partners who show up in their betrayal trauma, some of their symptoms look like and mirror borderline personality disorder, and they do get misdiagnosed as that from very well-meaning therapists, but it is damaging because we're not addressing the actual issue. the betrayal, the
The
trauma.
trauma of the betrayal, not just trauma in general.
Right.
Specific to
and
that
we're calling
betrayal.
that person part of the problem.
Right, and that's saying, well, if you weren't borderline personality disorder and you weren't this come here, go away, then
Interesting.
you wouldn't have this problem. But one of the things that we know is that it's not necessarily at the onset of discovery or disclosure, but that there are gut instincts that can happen all along the way. Let's say a couple has been married for 25 years. There's been some hints of something going on, or but we just don't know. We would confront it, and there's lies, or there's gaslighting. Gaslighting is this intentional misleading to make the one that they're saying it against to not live in their own reality. So if there is that going on, all under the surface, all hidden, and then all of a sudden we have this betrayal that comes out, their life at times will then eventually make sense. I'm saying that in the guise of this whole borderline personality conversation, that can be causing some of that. And I'm not saying the diagnosis, but it can be causing those symptoms of, I need you in my life, I want to be connected with you, but something doesn't feel right, and I have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what it is, and I'm just like on alert all the time. I'm asking, I'm trying to trust you, and yet you're telling me you're just crazy, or that's your baggage from your childhood, or from this person that you dated, or whatever. And yet something just doesn't feel right. And so I either have to abandon my own self to trust my partner, or I have to trust my partner, and then there will be this huge disconnect between us in this fight. And so what is a woman or man in this type of situation to do? They're going to abandon themselves. They're going to abandon themselves. And so one of the most damaging pieces of betrayal trauma that doesn't get talked about very much is this disintegration between the self, their gut instinct, and their brain.
Yeah.
So they're not connected. And so they lose their whole ability to trust themselves.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest pieces that I really try to work on. And I say, at all costs, if you have a trigger, you got to trust it.
Yeah.
If you have a gut instinct, you just trust it until it's proven different. So
Well, we understand neurobiologically, physiologically, that there is a nerve that goes from the brainstem down to the stomach. The stomach has some neurons in it, and actually will create a nauseous feeling just by virtue of microsignaling that's going on in the brain. Things that you consciously may not even be picking up on, but there are different data points that your brain's saying that's not normal. That's not the way that the pattern normally is. Disruptions in patterns create threat. And so the intuition that a spouse has, and I'm blown away at the number of times I've talked with a spouse who just knew and didn't know, but knew. And it is all of that physiological happening that God wired our bodies with that they just didn't trust. But when they don't trust it, and they question it, and they doubt it, and then it happens, that it comes out, it can cause the partner who's been betrayed to feel like, I'm an idiot.
Yes, I was just thinking that. Like we question, like, well, I knew this. Why didn't I trust? I'm such an idiot. And we do all this negative self-talk, which then contributes to the whole PTSD symptoms, because we then do it to ourselves. We shame ourselves for believing the one who we're supposed to believe. That they would be with us for better, for worse, forsaking all others till death do us part on that. And we don't know how to deal with like our own self-abandonment, their abandonment, everybody else's abandonment. I mean, we just isolate.
And you used the term earlier when you're talking about your response to pastors. You use the word abusive.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about this issue, this is absolutely abusive.
Yes.
One of the reasons I like the word abuse is because what it's going to do to them in the future. So when somebody experiences something bad from someone else, it might just be a bad thing that happened and they can get over it. But it might also be abusive in the term of how it's going to impact them going forward.
Yeah.
And so when you have a betrayer who is gaslighting his spouse, and she's got this knowing, she's got this intuition, she's got this gut brain thing going on, and she doesn't want to be that woman.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to be the nagging woman, and if she might take a risk. She might finally get enough nerve to take a risk and ask him, something doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
Okay? She's being super vulnerable. And then his response is, what are you doing? What are you talking about? I love you. How could you blame, or how dare you accuse me of something like that?
Which is gaslighting.
It's gaslighting,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it's going back to what Christine was saying. It's that it cuts off that gut-brain connection.
Yeah.
So now she is going to be less able and less likely to listen to her gut and trust her gut.
Yeah.
Because her gut is wrong. It's not wrong,
Right.
but he's made her think it's wrong.
Right.
And so then when it all comes out, there is this kind of a bit of satiation that happens as, oh, my gut brain wasn't right. I'm not crazy. But it doesn't fix anything. It's like it's like the next however long, maybe even worse, that as they go through recovery, a massive part of her recovery is going to be trusting her gut again.
Yeah.
Because it got broken.
Yeah.
And anybody that's doing something to someone else in that way is absolutely abusive.
Hey, I want to invite you, if you are listening and thinking, I have so many questions I would like to ask. We would love to address your questions on an upcoming episode. In fact, we may do an entire episode on the one question that you have. If you will simply email us at redinkrevival@gmail.com. We will catalog all of these questions, and we would love to be able to address the things on your heart and on your mind. So be sure to get in touch with us, and we'll take the journey together. From a biblical perspective, from a Jesus perspective, or from the most authoritative perspective of how to be a healthy human being, Jesus said the great commandment, love God. So the experience of God's love to you and you loving God, where intimacy is unbroken and you are connected. That's first and foremost. But then he said, though he wasn't asked, the second commandment is that you love your neighbor as yourself. Loving yourself is the second. You use the term self-abandonment. Powerful word. Sometimes we abandon God in just trying to make sense of life and anxiety and et cetera, because we have bad theology, so we blame him. And then we abandon ourselves. In this space that we're talking about, when a spouse, a betrayed partner, has had this intuition and they have been gaslighted, now then they've doubted it, and then they realize I was right, the sense of how they were disintegrated and caused to believe that they were not truly aligned with their intuition, right? Causes them now to now hate themselves. Because what anxiety tends to do for us is causes us to acknowledge threats. The threats are beginning, generalized. We don't know what the specific threat is, so our brains make everything a threat. And the threats are around survival and belonging. Will I survive? Will I belong? And in that whole kind of process, when the brain is trying to scan for where my threats are, it will often make the most powerful targeted threat against my survival and belonging, the self. That I'm the common denominator of everything that's screwed up in my life.
Right.
And so this is one more example where I didn't follow it. I don't trust me. I don't know what I did wrong. You know, for a lot of ladies, if they are ladies, the ladies will be like, I should have been more pretty. I should have gotten the boob job that I didn't get. Right. I should have lost weight. And it doesn't matter. What's amazing about anxiety, that no matter what goal you achieve, anxiety says, well, it's not enough.
Yeah.
So if you think, you know, along the way, if I lose 20 pounds, I'll love myself again. So what this is holding out the love of self until I accomplish something. Here it's 20 pounds.
Yeah.
If I reduce 20 pounds. But once the 20 pounds are gone, what you realize is I'm still disintegrated. I don't like me.
Right.
And so I just can only imagine the powerful work that has to be done to help bring a restoration of intimacy with the self, a radical acceptance, kindness, graciousness, which requires us to be able to do that in the backdrop of our flaws and imperfections, because we will never be perfect.
Yeah.
So how in the world do you guys help somebody who is betrayed? They're living in the intensity of the anxiety. How do you help them begin to repair with self?
First, I validate. I validate. I feel like I do many, many sessions of just sitting and listening to and hearing the pain, hearing the struggle, hearing the battle inside the brain of what's truth, what's not truth, and being able to just sit while the intensity of the pain begins to slowly subside so that we can then do something different. What I'm doing in those first several sessions is I'm building this trust between us. They don't trust anybody anymore. Like, they don't trust anybody.
Or what's even worse is if they do trust. What if they come to you, or a therapist who doesn't quite understand this, or a pastor who doesn't understand this, and they do trust? And they go with it, and it leads them down an even more painful road.
Another betrayal.
Another
path.
more painful road. So yeah, some partners, I agree with you, will have a very, very hard time trusting, but they're so desperate for help that they blindly trust someone, and that becomes a massive problem for them.
And can I just jump in? When they do that, the way the brain functions is looking for familiarity, because familiarity is that predictable pattern. The predictable pattern then releases what feels like threats. The generalized threats begin to calm. So in that space, they begin to trust, based on their wound profile, that wherever their wounds are from childhood, family history, and et cetera, they think, okay, here's somebody that I can trust. And then they end up blindly trusting somebody who ends up not actually having their back, right? Would you agree with all that?
Yeah.
So now then, let's go back to the person who just doesn't trust anybody. And what are you doing? You're validating them, and then what?
Yeah, well, I'm just sitting with their emotion, sitting with their story, allowing them to speak and just get it out, verbally vomiting in my office, if you will. If their spouse is still in the picture, we really try to, if they've not had a disclosure, that's such an important thing, a full inventory of the actual behavior. Say we're working towards reconciliation.
So a disclosure, for clarity, for everybody, is not just somebody saying, hey, I had an affair.
Right.
It is a full-out, methodic, supported with a therapeutic expert, somebody to write out all of the things that were in the betrayal, so there isn't this scab that comes from the initial, and then the ripping of the scab, and then the reintroduction of the trauma, and then it multiplies. So yes, that's the disclosure.
And the reason I'm talking about the disclosure is because what we want to establish is a foundation of truth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they don't have this, they're just like, almost like Gumby, where they're just falling all over the place. They don't know where to stand.
Yeah.
Let's say there has been a divorce or a separation, and it's not going to be repaired. Then we have them do their own foundation of truth. What is your storyline? What do you know? They may never have the full knowledge of what actually transpired.
Wow.
And in that, I think that is hard, very difficult. And yet it's healable, because what they need to know is their foundation is really on them, in them, and they can then trust themselves. So, foundation of truth through disclosure. If we have disclosure, then we work on boundaries. Boundaries are everywhere, right? I mean, how many podcasts have people talked about boundaries?
Right.
But, boundaries are empowering. They come out of their values. And when, the way I process it with them is that you start with your values. What do you value? And when there's a rupture or a breach of your value, what is the natural consequence that you feel? What do you feel emotionally?
Amazing.
What do you feel relationally? And then what do you need in order to get back to a sense of clarity? Most often, when there is a rupture or a boundary violation, what happens is they get triggered, they get activated, they get out of their window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And most often it's just so that they can get back to a place in their own brain where they can think clearly.
Yeah,
They can get back and stand on their own foundation of truth, their values. And so we work on values. If the husband or spouse is still in the picture, then we communicate that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a slow process.
Yeah.
It's a really slow process of validating, and things will happen. I mean, if you just see somebody once a week, you got a lot of other hours for life to just implode. And so it's a lot of managing of emotion, learning how to regulate your own self, learning how to listen to your gut, learning how to build really healthy communities.
Yeah.
I tell people, if you can't do anything, do a group. Do a group, because to be in a room with other women or other men who have experienced the same trauma that you have, even though the story is different, there's nothing more connecting and validating. And that's the attachment piece. We have to have attachment in our life, connection, vulnerability, where we're seen and heard and loved and cared for and called out too, when we're like going down a trail of, well, he's this and he's that. No, get back to yourself. Like, what do you need in those moments? And group members will do that for each other.
Wow.
It's really a beautiful thing.
Let me break in one more time and tell you about RedInkRevival.com, REDINK Revival.com. I want to encourage you to sign up for our blog e-newsletter there, as every month it will hit your inbox with a provocative blog post with topics about theology, biblical architecture for emotions, and how understanding the human brain is so helpful in giving more insights to various biblical texts. We also will feature updates on our monthly events to help you keep up on the ready for everything that is available to you. Also, I'd like to remind you, if this podcast is serving you with valuable insights, to subscribe to the podcast. If you think someone else would benefit from it, please review it, comment, and share it on your social media platforms. If your friends are privileged to know what's helping you, who knows what God might do in their life with the same resources. That would be a gift to us, and it would be a gift to all your friends. We're holding you in our hearts and believing God with you for a year of supernatural increase.
Well, on that, I love, as a therapist, you're validating. And the reason on a neurobiological level that we are doing that is because you're actually lending the social organ called the brain. You're lending your brain to be in social connection with their brain. And just like a parent is able to lend the prefrontal cortex to a child who's dysregulated, which is what happens in parenting, that's what you're doing. You're literally saying, I know that you are limping along and you're dealing with pain and grief and sorrow. Let me give you my brain to help you live out health and recovery.
Yeah.
Now, when I hear about these groups, it's not uncommon, and again, I'm not sterilizing this, it's not uncommon to hear some betrayed partner say, I don't want to get in a group of women where everybody's bitching.
That was me.
So what?
That was me. I went to a group twice, and I was like, "This is not for me." Like it was.
Yeah.
It was. It has to be a healthy group. I mean,
Well, what's a
it
healthy
really-
group versus an unhealthy group?
where they're not just bitching all the time.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
they are actually learning about themselves and talking about themselves when they're bringing it back to themselves.
Yeah.
If we're only talking and complaining about our husbands, that is not healthy. You will not grow until you turn it inward and you learn about yourself. And you have to also learn about the addiction. So we do a lot of psychoeducation. So we're stimulating the brain. Knowledge is power. So when we feel flooded sometimes and we're triggered, we can speak out the trigger, and that will activate the prefrontal cortex so that we can actually access the knowledge that we have learned
Yes.
about what is addiction, what is the cycle that my husband goes through that we talk about, like what is trauma,
Yep.
what is
Yeah.
mindfulness, just all
What are boundaries?
what are boundaries,
What do I
What-
feel? Attunement. How am I experiencing? That's
Right.
amazing. Absolutely amazing. Let's talk a little bit more about what goes into a good group and not so good group. And the part of this is it's so important for people to bring their grief story out, to be able to look at it, to know the features in it, and yet there is a difference in somebody who's just going to groan, moan, and complain,
Yeah.
and somebody who's going to be able to take that out. And there may be elements of some of that in it, but for them to be able to recover in what is the grief story, it requires there to be a meeting of empathy and then being able to help make sense of that and give meaning to that, correct?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
do you have more that you could help us? Because this isn't just about betrayal groups. This is actually about our human experience in churches that, some pastors are like, just don't complain. The messages from the pulpit, just don't complain.
Yeah.
And so many people within Christianity think, I can never tell the authentic story of my life
Yeah.
and what I'm
Yes.
attuned to. So talk about some
Isn't
of that.
that a form of gaslighting?
Talk about that.
When you hear that, don't talk about reality. Don't question reality, because that's not what a Christian does, or for whatever reason is presented that we shouldn't talk about things, or we go to your small group, your Bible study group, and just talk about the scripture, but we don't ever get into real life. Is that a form of gaslighting? That this organization or this pastor or this small group leader or a husband or a wife is not, don't look here, look here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just don't admit that this is reality. Pretend that this is reality.
But even take it a
know?
step further. So what did we talk about earlier with gaslighting? Gaslighting in its essence is abuse.
Right.
So would you put that on that?
Interesting.
Telling people to not own their own reality or not talk about what's real and what's going on is a form of abuse.
Yeah.
And in a spiritual environment, it is spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
We have to be cautious about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when a person comes into some of my groups, and all they want to do is talk about their spouse, because that is distressing. Their marriage is distressing. They need to talk about it. There has to be some way to bring them back to talking, like Christine, talking about self. Okay, what are you experiencing in this? When she said this, or when she did this, or she reacted this way, what happened for you? What gets in the way of your own curiosity about her? What gets in the way of your own curiosity about yourself? What floods you with anger? What floods you with defensiveness? And why did that happen? And how can you understand yourself better? And how do you get back to your values? Are there boundaries you need to set? Because your values are being violated by the way he or she is interacting with you, or talking to you, or treating you.
Yeah. Yeah. So important. I think about one of the therapists that I met with in more recent times that offered a lot of helpful pieces to who I am. And I was talking about a particular person that I had struggles with. And this the statement I kept using was, yeah, but the person, they were kind of clueless about what they were doing. They were unaware of the impact they were having on my life. And the therapist just went, bam, and said to me, Patrick, you don't realize that you're allowing your empathy to deny reality. Now, see, we as Christians, we're supposed to be truth people. Truth is synonymous with reality.
Right.
And so if we deny reality, we actually are denying the potential of truth, and therefore we cannot be free, because the truth that you know makes you free.
Yes.
On that note, though, I'm going to kind of come back around. As pastors, it's not uncommon for us to know people, and this isn't, one pastor, it's multiple, of course, work with pastors on the regular, and they will have people in their churches who hotwire connections through drama. So when you walk up and we all know what that person's like. When they walk into your space, the circle for which you're standing, they come in, they've never once asked you how you're doing or what life is like or what's happening in the larger picture. They don't have social skills beyond walking up and then immediately throwing all kinds of drama that's been going on in their life. And it's every time. It's not like this is just one occasion. So let's kind of talk about how those people would show up maybe in groups, whether it's groups in a church group system, or whether it's addiction groups, or whether it is a partner betrayal group. What would you do if you were facilitating that group?
They're hard. So I don't even know how to answer that, honestly.
I love it.
I think you have to be really strong.
If this is something, I want you to answer, but if this is something that the two of you are having to take pause and think, it is difficult, how would I do it? I think there's empathy that we feel as pastors for ourselves that these things are sometimes challenging. So what would you say?
I think you have to have a really strong leader that will be able to manage the space and at the same time control the random, I guess. Because otherwise the other people in the group will lose interest. And it'll always be about that, and it'll always be about this, and they won't ever have a space to show up themselves. So it's really critical to have a really strong leader to do that. Let's say you don't have a really strong leader. I'm guessing the group will fizzle. Because that you have to, one person can't, it's not a group. There's no I in group, right?
Right.
Well, I have an answer to your question.
Okay.
So I have a client that I'm meeting with individually. He's not in a group, but I think I would probably handle him in a similar way. If he was in group, he comes in, unloads all this stuff every week about his spouse and what she's doing and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I've had to get really strong with him and say, okay, I'll give him a little bit of leeway on his leash, about 5 minutes. And then I'll stop him and say, I don't want to talk about your wife anymore. I don't want to know anything about her. I don't want you to bring her up. I don't want to talk about how she's going to react to something we're talking about. I don't want to talk about your wife. I want to talk about you. What are you doing? What do you need? What's healthy for you? What are your boundaries?
That's amazing.
Because they will just, I think what he's trying to do, he's trying to do is, he's deflecting on himself. He doesn't want to look at himself, but he wants my empathy. He wants my sympathy for his experience.
Right.
I get that.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to give that to him. I know it's hard. I think I hope I've done a good job of letting him know that I know that it's hard. But it's not going to get fixed until he does something about it.
Right.
And when he gets real with himself about his own experience, and stops trying to blame her or focus on her, but starts to focus on himself, that's when he's going to start picking up some tools that will begin to change the story of his life.